Hello, and welcome to Bridgeford Trust Company's Delivering Direction and Control podcast series. Our podcast series is designed to educate, challenge, and inspire listeners while keeping you updated on developments regarding modern trust law and powerful planning opportunities available, all in an effort to deliver direction and control to clients and their advisors.
Well, hello, everybody. This is David Warren here with another episode of our podcast series, which I have been saying lately, I'm excited to say has become very successful. And we're very excited about the thought leadership that we've been able to bring to our audience. When we started Bridgeford many years ago, we always wanted to position the company and ourselves as being thought leaders. And today is certainly no exception. And in fact, today is somewhat special for me. I think all of us as professionals have times in their lives where they run into people professionally where they just have an impact on the way you think about the world. And I had this happen to me twice at the same company at Bank of New York Mellon, of which I have a lot of affection for still. And there were two professionals that had a big impact on me. In fact, in many respects, had impact on the vision that we had ultimately that became Bridgeford Trust Company. And Tom Rogerson is one of those people. Also, of course, Tom Holbrank, a common friend of ours, has also had that kind of impact on my life. And Tom is such an interesting person because he made me think about the financial wealth planning, family office world in a different way. And so if you bear with me, Tom, I'm going to recount a memory of my first contact with you. I'm a young, newly minted sales guy for the first time. As a lot of you know, I'm a lawyer by training, but decided that I was passionate and excited about what we could do in the wealth management world and became, for lack of a better phrase, again, a sales guy at Bank of New York Mellon in the Northeast. And part of my training was something called articulation training, which was a week-long training where they really taught us how to talk about Mellon, Bank of New York Mellon. And remember, the Mellon swagger is what they like to call it. And I drank the Kool-Aid and loved every minute of that week-long session. So one afternoon, we have a session with this guy, Tom Rogerson, and we walk in, and the session begins in a way none of us expected, with Tom performing magic tricks. And I'm looking around thinking, okay, so I came all the way to Boston for some guy to perform magic. I mean, I want to be taught how to be a sales guy. Teach me how amazing Mellon is. And ultimately, that session was so impactful. And we're going to talk about why over the next 25, 30 minutes on the way that I look at the world and even what we do at Bridgeford. Because Tom talked about a topic that I never really thought about. It talked about now the way we say it at Bridgeford is, protecting the next generation from themselves. And Tom is going to get into really more what that means. And that's become a passion point. It has been a passion point for the Genesis of Bridgeford. But now recently I've been writing a little bit about it. We just published something analyzing succession, Tom, that I'd like to get your thoughts on, which is the example of all the things not to do, right? If you're trying to protect the next generation. So Tom talked to us about the books he was reading. He talked to us about the amazing work he was doing with families, all within the theme of protecting the next generation from themselves from extreme wealth, because it can be dangerous if not handled properly. And Tom taught me that. He lit my fire for that conversation. He taught me that when you're talking to a large family about coming to Bank of New York Mellon or coming to Bridgeford, really, they're not concerned about investment management so much they're concerned about it, but what they're really worried about is what's going to happen to their kids and their next generation, the next generation after that. So Tom taught me how to talk about what we did at Mellon in that context, and less about the commoditization of what wealth managers do, right, Tom? And more about how you really add value to somebody's life. So Tom had a very, very successful career at Bank of New York Mellon, and then he moved on to some other large institutions as a prophet, the way I would describe you, kind of speaking the gospel of how we protect these next generation kids and families. And so now I'm very excited to have him talk about his own company. He does this work on his own with his wife, who's also very impressive, and Tom will talk about that. The company is called GenLegCo, and certainly we'll have his website available afterwards. But the point of that company that inspires me even more to talk to Tom is he has the same passion that we do at Bridgeford about independence and avoiding conflicts of interest. And that's really the foundational principle of Bridgeford, was why we founded the idea of a directed trust, why we love the idea of being independent, and having no conflict. So, Tom, I can't thank you enough, not only for being with us today, but really the impact you had on my career as a young person in the business. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but I can tell you, I mention your name a lot and have now for almost 15 years of being an entrepreneurial business owner myself. You've had a big impact not only on me, but I know everybody you've ever taught, everybody you've ever been in front of. You should be proud of your career. You should be proud of your brand. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm very pleased to be with you again. So, yeah, thanks very much, David. And I look forward to our conversation today and getting into my background, how I came to this field, and then what we're doing.
Sure. Let's start there. I guess I was thinking about that the last night. I mean, how did you discover this passion point that you have and discovered how important it was in the industry? And because nobody was talking about it, as I recall when I was young, this was not anything that anybody else was really looking at.
Right. No, I was very blessed. I came from a family of quite significant wealth going back a few generations here in the Massachusetts area on my father's side. My mother's side, though, she's one of 8 children from a poor Cuban family in southern Cuba, down near Santiago de Cuba. And I learned more about what I'm doing now to help families preserve wealth from my mother's family that didn't have any money, because it wasn't about preserving money, it was about preserving the family. And my father's family, it was they actually allowed the wealth that they had to separate more quickly and know each other actually less than my mother's family did. So I started out years ago as a estate planning, doing this at Coopers and Lybrand, building. Basically, Coopers was dominant in Boston in audit, but they had no financial planning for these business owners. And so I built an estate planning practice to help these business owners protect those assets from one generation to the next. But about the time I got hired away by the wealth management industry, I met Jay Hughes, and Jay Hughes blew me
Mm,
away,
I remember
because
Jay.
I was
Yeah.
running a conference for the World President Organization, and a friend of mine, Charlie Collier, who was at Harvard, who was a major gift officer at Harvard, said, you ought to have Jay Hughes speak. And I said, who's Jay Hughes? Well, Jay came and spoke, and he was the first person I ever saw at a conference for the World President Organization where he got straight 10, which is the highest evaluation. I've
Wow.
never seen that before with the
Did,
world. They're
did he
pretty
have
tough
magic?
group.
Did he have magic tricks too, or no?
I did that for him. No. But he was amazing, and he had been an attorney, and he recognized that he had pledged to do no harm, but he was doing all this estate tax planning, and then he looked at the results in the family and felt like, I'm not sure I'm not doing harm. And he had this epiphany, and he took a long time off, but he started this process of how do we help prepare the family for the wealth rather than prepare the wealth for the family. And so I've just ridden that bus the whole way, and now a lot's come along. Now there are a lot of people now in this space, but most of them are pretty new, and they come up from a psychological standpoint. They're psychiatrists or psychologists, and we come from a much more practical standpoint of just having had a chance to work with families. And because I built a family wealth or family governance practice at 3 different wealth firms. Before Mellon, it was at State Street Global Advisors. Then it was at Mellon, and then it was at Wilmington Trust Company. And I was at 7 years at each one of those firms building this. But so I had a chance to now, and then with my wife, work with over 300 families at getting them up and running, at having a family meeting process. And there are just very few of the other people out there that have had that many families that they've worked with. So we've been very blessed, and it's been a really. I've you said I forget what you said I was, but I feel like I'm more of an evangelist in this space as a prophet. You said I'm more of an evangelist. I'm really trying. I've drunk the Kool-Aid myself, and I'm trying to get more people on board. How do we prepare the family for what's to come, and use it effectively for the long haul?
Yeah, I love it. And again, I never thought about it until you taught this to me and you recommended. I think the first book I read in this genre was Shirt Sleeves to Shirt Sleeves, right? I think, in fact, I think you kind of taught that to us as part of your presentation. And why don't you talk about sort of some of the techniques? Because I know that you have some very clear have a very clear vision on how to prepare these families and how to get people talking to each other and how to get people to understand the responsibilities of wealth. That was something else you taught me too. Is wealth is great in many ways, but it's also an awesome responsibility to handle correctly. So get into some of that for us.
Yeah, I think the real critical piece for all of us that want to try and get out there and talk about this is to understand the people that we're hoping to engage. Because Babson did a study finding that over 77%, other studies have shown 80% of the wealthiest people in the world today are first generation wealth creators. Musk, Bezo. I mean, get down the list. It goes, and so we tend to think that money is old money, and it's not true. Most of the wealth in the world, and certainly in this country, is first generation wealth. So that means, by definition, these people grew up in a non-wealthy environment. Typically, they identify themselves as growing a blue collar or working class background, not poverty, typically, but a functional working class family. And what we often diagram when we're talking about this is, if you imagine like a grid, on the right hand side or the left hand side, um, the human dependent phase, and on the but down here the level of wealth going up, with kind of on the dependent phase, kind of reverse what you expect, with dependent people being at the top, and then independent, and then interdependent. And right in that corner is interdependent people that don't have a lot of wealth, but are interdependent, and that's where these low net worth families typically were. And they had interdependence. Dinner table conversations were very consequential because they had to be. When somebody said, "Can I borrow the car on Friday night?" everyone got involved because it's the car. And they even made decisions together early in the morning: who gets a bathroom first, things like that, who mows the lawn this weekend. They learned how to work together. But if somebody in that family has chutzpah and ability to make a lot of money, they want to raise their children in a different environment because they look back on that and they think that was hardship. They want to raise their children to have their own bedroom, to have a lawn crew, to have their own car. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it creates less working together. And the reason that's important is, in some of the biggest studies that have been done, including some of the work that we've done ourselves, families that have said they failed at preserving their wealth, and more importantly, their family, the number one reason they attributed to failing was due to lack of experience and trust at group decision making. The very thing that low net worth families have to do by necessity, high net worth families get away from as part of the blessing of wealth. And that's fine. I'm all for independence, but they end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What we're trying to do with families, and really to winnow it right down, is to reintroduce interdependence. The difference is, over here, they had to do it by necessity. Over here, they have to do it voluntarily, which means somebody has to educate them on why it's important, what it looks like. And ultimately, it helps these people understand how to receive what they're going to receive
Yeah.
financially much better.
Oh, I love it. No, that's perfectly said. I get it completely. It always not being able to communicate properly is always the problem, I guess. And I was joking earlier about succession, which I loved. And, as being in the industry, I mean, so much of that show, I thought of you. I thought, wow, because I mean, there's almost everything you can do wrong, they did wrong, and including the decision making. I mean, I know it's pop culture and it's meant to entertain, but there's some real lessons there that you've been preaching about for your whole career almost. And so tell me, so how do you get people talking? I mean, I know the magic tricks, as much as I've been joking around about it. I think, although I think has been, right, a very powerful tool to get people to open up, right, to break the ice. So talk to me. I mean, you're very deliberate in what you're not just entertaining people. There's a reason for that. So talk about your strategy there.
Yeah, it really is important, because when I'm typically hired by the parents, who usually hear of me from their advisor, from some of the public speaking I do. I do a lot of charitable work, and I speak to a lot of boards of charities. So they'll often hear of me, or see something in that regard, and give us a call. And so I'm then trying to get them to understand, what this would look like. So if they bring me in, the children view me as mom or dad's shill. That I'm going to come in and I'm going to say all the things that I'm going to hammer home what mom and dad want them to
You're going to
understand.
tell them whether or not they can have the car, right?
Exactly. I'm going to be whatever, the velvet hammer or something. And so, to break the ice, the magic tricks absolutely make a huge difference, because all of a sudden I become a human being. They're intrigued. They're asking, how'd you do it? How'd you learn it? Whatever. And all of a sudden I become a human being. And then it's a lot easier then to really engage with them going forward. But we tell the parents, when we interview the parents early on, we say, we want you to know that when we come into the room, we're not coming in as your advocate. We're coming in as an advocate for your children and for your family as a whole. And if you're okay with that, then I think we can make a big difference.
Well, and not to carry the analogy too much further, but then it allows you your magic tricks allow you to perform the ultimate magic trick, which is to get these families talking and to protect the subsequent generations. So I think it's brilliant, and I've sat through so many of your conversations. I've listened to some of your stuff I found online, and it's effective. It's really effective, and I think completely unique. Talk to us a little bit about your wife. I think your partnership with her is really amazing, and her training, because I think you bring. I mean, look, lots of people talk about this now, right? When I first met you, there weren't a lot of people talking about it. Now somehow everybody's kind of trying to copy you, quite frankly, if you don't mind me saying that. But I think what you have in a bit of a secret weapon is your wife, because you come at this with a psychological foundation that I think others don't, and I'm being respectful to the competition, but I don't think they have the. I mean, there's a lot going on here that isn't just about having a family meeting and doing a magic trick, right? There's a lot of psychology that is brought to bear, and your wife really helps you with that, right? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, she really does. I mean, because my background, as you know, was really more practical from my family and my mother's family. I mean, my mother's family, I mean, working together in a poor Cuban town in southern Cuba, plus getting out of a communist country together and all, they built interdependence that lasted until the day my mother died. So I brought practical experience of how do you try and build these kind of better relationships and understand how to work with each other, because that's really critical. But my wife grew up in Lake Forest, Illinois. She grew up with some of the wealthiest families you can think of, with the Pullman Car Railroad Company and Armour Bacon and all kinds and Kellogg and so all kinds of very famous names. And but she was growing up with the third, fourth, or fifth generations of some of these people in this very wealthy town. She doesn't come from an extremely wealthy family at all, but she was seeing these people, and she just saw the negative effect that the wealth was having on them in their behavior, in their attitude towards others. And so ultimately, she became a relationship coach, and she was helping parents have better relationship with their children, children learning how to communicate better with their parents, siblings working better with each other. And I was not doing that when I was at BNY Mellon and other places. I was really trying to just get the family started, but really leading them elsewhere to get work done. She filled in a critical piece where actually be able to help the family. Hey, Johnny and Mary, can we get can we figure out how you guys can talk more effectively together? So I had at Mellon a 6-step process to healthy family governance. It's now a 7-step process, and it always starts at the foundation. You got to build a foundation before you can go above it. So we start our list down here at step 1 is the foundation, which is an assessment of where the family is today, which I can share more about if you want later on. But the second, and that's where we do interviews, we send out material and we get it all back and process it. But the second step is where we come together with the family at a family meeting and we educate them. And we educate them on two things. One is, why are families failing? What's going on? What is the research showing? What's the practical? And so they really
Yeah,
embrace it.
if I could jump in on it, and it's not just anecdotal. When I first heard this, I thought, well, is there really evidence to support what happens to third and fourth generation? And the answer is absolutely. There's statistics. I mean, very, very bad things that can happen. Not just the squandering of wealth, but drug addiction and all kinds of terrible things. So put some color around that for the audience, because as I said, this isn't just an anecdotal cocktail discussion at a country club. I mean, this is a real problem for families as well.
It absolutely is, and I'm glad you brought up some of those topics because Dr. Madeline Levine, in her book, The Price of Privilege, it's a great book to get a sense of this. But what she was finding, she's out in California, but she was finding in her practice is that wealthy children were 2 to 5 times more likely to have the presenting problems you were talking about, where they could be, low self-esteem, loneliness. Loneliness is often the beginning of a lot of this, and anxiety around that. But because of that, depression, and substance abuse, all kinds of issues. And so we were seeing, and suicide rates were much higher. In the wealthy children, the privileged children were 2 to 5 times more likely to have those presenting problems than the average American child. So wealth was not causing that. Wealth was allowing that. What was happening, the parents, the way they were raising the children with this separation and telling them, you can stand on my shoulders and be more successful than me, not realizing how intimidating that could be for a poor child. And the other thing that often happened to the parents often wouldn't talk about the wealth. They often thought, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to, have entitled children, so I don't want to talk about it." But that left the children totally unaware and unprepared for the conversations they were going to have when they go to school.
Yeah.
And they, would show up at school and somebody say, "Hey, I know you. I know you guys. I know where you guys live. You guys are
Mm-hmm.
rich."
Mm-hmm.
They don't mean
Mm-hmm.
that as a compliment. And it doesn't mean you have to teach your kid how to fight and punch a kid in the nose, but what should they think? What should they think about
Right.
wealth? And they don't know how to have those conversations, and so that provides an incredible opportunity for us to come in and help them start those
No,
conversations.
I love it. I love it. Well, so let's go to the second level then. Let's talk about the next step.
Okay, so the first is the assessments where we do the interviews and phone calls. The second is the education where we
Mhm.
actually two parts of it of the education. One is what's going wrong and right, and we just show some of the studies. It only takes an hour and a half to share that with the family to get them up to speed. But the second part of the education is the reveal of the assessments we did before. And where they have a chance to see. And what's great about the assessments is it's not when we actually like one of the assessment items is it's a series of statements we would send out in one of the assessments, and here's one of the examples of a statement. We have identified the best role for each of our family members that leverage their unique talents and gifts. I know their strengths and they know mine, and we work well together. That's just a statement. On one side of the page they grade how important would it be for us to accomplish what that statement said, and the other side of the page they grade how well are we doing at it right now. And they might grade that a 5 on importance, which is the top, and a 0 on accomplishment. That would be a 5-point gap. And if Johnny had that and Mary had a 4-point gap, we add them all up and then we can prioritize the list and come and then reveal it to the family. And it's not us coming in and saying, here's what you should do. It's them basically telling us what they want to do. And then they own it. So then they're much more
Yeah,
inclined.
it's like they came up with the idea, not you, right? So
Exactly, and so then it empowers us to be able to then show them, if you wanna do what you just said you wanna do, here's how to do it. So the next step we take them through is a communication exercise or leadership assessment. If we're gonna try and start working together, we better learn how to do it differently. Because I often say, "If I tried working with you 5 times before and it didn't work, trying again, but speaking louder is not a good strategy."
I
And
wish
yet
somebody
this
would have told my father that when I was growing up.
Yeah, but that's typically where we go. So how can I learn how you like to receive information so I can present it differently and so that you're more likely to receive it? Well, that requires two things. I have to learn how you like to receive it, and I have to learn how I could share it differently. That's what this tool does. Teaches people how to style shift, and all by itself, it helps immensely with families. But that's the third step. The next step, we all do this in the first meeting, is a values exercise where they have a chance to work on their individual values and create a list of it. And then we share that with everybody and come up with what are the shared family values. But that leads then to, okay, what's your vision for the future? What would you like the family to look like? Everybody coming up with their vision 30 years from now, 50, 100 years from now, and then creating a mission statement of how would we get to what that looks like. So that's just the first 4 steps. Conflict is the next step, where Kathy comes in and really teaches them, how do you practice and manage conflict? How do I express my truth? You got to express your truth. You can't avoid it. Sweeping it under the rug is the worst thing you could do, but then trying to do it badly is the second worst thing you could do. Well, how do you do it well? How can I express my truth gracefully? And that's where she teaches them how to practice and manage conflict, all of which we think those are stepping stones to be able to start engaging in activities they could do where they're working together, like family philanthropy
yeah, I
or
was going to ask
planning the
you.
next family
Yeah,
vacation.
let's focus on that because I think that's sort of where we collide in our worlds. I mean, I know the nonprofit world is an amazing way to help get kids to next generation understand managing money. So you can talk to us about that. I love the private trust company model, which we service those. That's another way of kind of getting there, right? To get the families talking and understanding how to manage after you go through the 6, 7 steps, or even just before a private trust company, a family office, an actual family office, organized. I mean, everybody calls themselves a family office now, but you know what I mean by a real true family office operation. So talk to us about that because I love that model because it pulls it all together and gets people operating with family values and inculcation of values over generations, and that just gets me very excited. So talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's a really simple example of a beginning place is of the family vacation. Usually, a family of wealth would typically the parents would come up with a budget, they would come up with a location and make the plans, and they invite the kids and make sure everyone's coordinated to go on the trip. Very often, usually, by the way, the kids don't have any clue how much it costs, and they just went on a fabulous vacation and spent and had a wonderful time. Well, what if the parents came up with a budget for the vacation and gave it to the children and said, "We can't wait to see where you take us"? And now it provides an opportunity for the children to learn how to make decisions together. Remember, the number one reason the families were failing, according to Families That Fail, was due to lack of experience and trust at group decision making. So here the children are given an opportunity to make decisions that do have a consequence, but that they're excited about and looking forward to. We're not forcing them to come into the business right away. We're teaching them how to make decisions together before we bring them into more advanced things.
But what if they want to go to Ocean City, New Jersey? I'm just joking. Just joking. I grew up right in Ocean City, New Jersey. I didn't mean to knock that, but no, I get it though. I get it, and I think that, and also I've seen the idea of getting children involved on boards or foundation. They create their own foundation and put the kids on the boards. I don't mean kids as 5-year-olds. I mean young adults, to teach them the responsibility of this wealth. Right. So we go from talking about the tragedies that can happen in third and subsequent generations. Right. With all the terrible statistically terrible things that could happen. But then let's flip it to the positive. So now training these next generation children to understand the power of wealth and the good that can be done, and how what the United States is the most philanthropic country on the planet Earth, and some say even it's a fourth arm of government for philanthropy, which I can't say, but I love it. So talk about that, because I think I've seen that work so well, where a 25-year-old kid who might be driving around a Lamborghini suddenly gets it and realizes that he can change the world. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, family philanthropy is one of the top items that we find as well. Usually, children like the idea of starting with planning the vacation because it's a little bit closer to home. But usually, right after that, we're introducing family philanthropy as an idea they can engage in, because you're right, it gets them outside of themselves. And what's really interesting is now, of course, there's so much work in positive psychology. And Arthur Brooks, his books, From Strength to Strength, is a brilliant book that is worth reading. But he's the number one most oversubscribed course at Harvard Business School is his class, and it's called Management and Happiness. So it's about positive psychology and how do you have a better outlook on the world around you. And one of the top things to do is to help others. Altruism actually it turns on your endorphins. So how do you then get your children experiencing that? And it also gives them a groundedness. It's very easy to just assume the lifestyle you have is normal, and you're often in a nice neighborhood and you think it's normal. There's nothing normal about the lifestyle of the people that we work with. Nothing bad about it, but there's nothing normal about it. And if the children don't have a chance to experience what actual normal looks like, they don't experience the blessing of what their lifestyle actually is. So there's a wonderful acronym that really kind of focus on all this. GRACE, grace. But the G is for generosity, R is for reciprocity, and how do we work together to accomplish things. The A is for altruism, actually helping others. The C is for choice. It's got to be a choice of mine to engage, but the enjoyment is what ensues from it. And it's not that uh, it's that enjoyment ensues or follows the work and the helping of others. So philanthropy can be an incredibly powerful tool to build self-esteem in the individual, build a groundedness and knowledge, and lower the number of people that have the presenting problems that Madeline Levine was identifying in her book.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's great. Grace. I'm gonna remember that. I need to extend more grace, I think, in my life. But no, that's fantastic. Hearing you talk again just re-inspires me to keep thinking about this stuff. Tell us, what are the other books you're looking at? What would you recommend for our listeners? Because I remember, again, when I first met you, I went out and bought the books you told me to go out and read, and it had a big impact. So what's the current thinking in the field right now that you like?
Well, the problem is there isn't really a book on this particular topic. My wife and I are writing one. I mean, Jay Hughes' books are still, his first one anyway, I think is still brilliant. There are a few other people that have written some interesting books. Uh, Coventry Edwards Pitt has written 3 different books on the topic of how to raise healthy, wealthy, and wise children. But there aren't any that I think give the real roadmap of how to go through some of these steps. And by the way, I wanted to finish on one of the steps. I took you through the first 6, which is the sixth one is the actions that they can engage in when they're making decisions together, planning the vacation. But the last step is where the family as a whole looks back with the parents, looks at their estate plan and thinks, how do we turn this from an estate plan into a legacy plan? An estate plan minimizes the taxes and puts protections on it. A legacy plan is investing into that vision the family has together of the future. And it requires a really long-term, dedicated trust company, independent. And that's why I love working with you guys. But the other piece of it is, and I think you remember me talking about this, an attorney named Marvin Blum and I from the Blum firm, his firm, largest estate planning practice we think in the country. He's got like 40 attorneys dedicated to estate planning only in Texas. But Marvin and I came up with a trust designed to endow the family meeting process. So most trusts, are just, as you know, distribute money to the beneficiaries and they go out and they buy something like and they can hold it in their hand. This trust would never distribute money to any of the beneficiaries ever. Then you wonder, well, then what the heck is the purpose of it? It is designed to invest in the beneficiaries. So it would endow a family meeting where they come together and they learn. They don't walk away with things in their hand, they walk away with things in their head. It would often also own the legacy properties like the ranch or the retreat center, wherever they have. And that requires a dedicated trust company that has, jurisdictional uh, preferences like South Dakota does. So that's why I was so intrigued with where you were and where the linkage is. But that's the 7-step process. It goes all the way from reintroducing the family to themselves to eventually bringing it back to how do we design a plan where the plan for the money is actually meeting the plan for the family that the family chose together.
Yeah, no, I love it. I really appreciate you taking us through that. And yes, those trusts I'm very familiar with. South Dakota, we call them purpose trusts, right? So they don't have
Yes.
a specific, yeah, and not a lot of jurisdictions even have those. So there's only a handful of U.S. jurisdictions that even has a codified purpose trust to accomplish just what you said. And I think Nevada does and others, but we love it, and I get it. And you hit on it, and it's a great way to sort of take us to the end. I mean, you go through your process and you bring back the conversation around structure to support the foundation that you put together over the 6-7 steps, right? And so that becomes back or brings back the conversation about the industry and our industry as a whole. And something that I've noticed, and I really want you to comment on this because you're helping me make an argument that I've been crafting with this conversation is, within the last couple of years or more, our industry collectively has been under fire, with these data leaks. And you and me and anybody that is trying to do good for wealthy families somehow are bad actors, and we're helping rich people hide taxes, and we're dealing with nefarious people, and boy, we're just terrible. And that's a theme that I've noticed and become a bit defensive around. And when I speak, I raise the topic. And everything you just talked about is virtuous. Everything you just talked about is vital. And I like to keep referencing Succession because you see the terrible things that don't happen when we don't do this type of planning. So not only is what our industry doing not nefarious, but it's, as I said, virtuous and essential. And I think that I'm amazed. I mean, I consider myself still young at 52, that I'm in a position to have to defend a purpose trust, or I have to defend an asset protection trust. Like somehow, I mean, what we're all doing is just following the rules that have been given to us by the IRS, right, and state law, and so on and so forth. None of us are breaking the law. And I've come to say lately, it's like a chess game, and I love this quote. I mean, whoever knows the rules of the game of chess best usually wins, and that's what we're doing. So you're taking your foundational planning, bringing it back into a trust company model or a wealth management model with the tools available, right, to continue what you've built. but you're not doing bad work. You're doing amazing work. So how have you dealt with that? I mean, you've been in this industry longer than I have. I mean, I would imagine you've seen this. I mean, maybe it's always been somewhat negative, but you see now with New York Times writes articles, in some cases attacking even states like South Dakota, like we're doing something wrong, which to me is mind blowing because nobody's doing anything wrong. So please comment on that.
Well, it's a great point, and maybe some of my vision of this is skewed by the kind of people that would want to hire us in the first place. The kind of people that would want to hire us love their kids and love their family and want the best for their kids. And sometimes you look at Succession and you get a sense that the Rupert Murdoch type, whatever. I've never really watched the show because I thought it was almost a pantomime of what not to do, and we don't deal with people like that, so it wasn't worth watching because it's just think of the worst thing that could happen and they show it. So, so and we don't
That's
actually
basically
see
what it is. That's basically what it is.
we find parents that actually love their children, and they think everything's going great because they're not having arguments there. But what they're finding when we dig into it more is they're having more cocktail party conversation with their children at dinner. They're not having consequential conversation with their children. We're providing an opportunity to get involved in that. What's interesting is these business owners that we work with will build teams at work with an intention of not just making a profit, but taking care of their employees too. They're very caring. They build incredible teams, and I often hear from these entrepreneurs. They say, "I'm so upset at these charities that come knocking on my door because they say, 'Hey, I heard you made a lot of money. Now it's time you can do some good.'" And as if building the business and paying their employees and helping grow a community and help is not doing good. It's the so anyway. And yes, there are some capitalists that just are focusing on greed, 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 but that's not the majority of the business owners out there in America. They're building teams at work. They build teams that are their management team turnover rates are typically very low. They build one, but the same people go home and they build independence to the point of estrangement with their children at home. And all we're trying to help them do is how do you take that virtuous mentality of building a team, trying to take care of your employees, build a community while you're taking care of your clients and making profit. How do you take that mentality home and teach it and enable, empower your children? How do you create an entrepreneurial environment at home? Because usually these entrepreneurs grew up in that lower corner where I said low net worth, tremendous interdependence. They grew up there by necessity. They raised their children to be independent to the point of estrangement from each other. They grew up in an entrepreneurial incubator. They raise their children in an entrepreneurial kill zone. And when I say those words to them, they're usually, holy cow, you're describing what I've done. How do I turn it around? And that's where we have a business because, if that headstrong dad or headstrong mom thinks, I've got the message, I'm going to go home and pound it in their heads. They may have the right message, but they're usually the wrong messenger. It usually needs a third party to come in. Sorry, an alarm. It usually requires a third party to come in, whether it's us or somebody else. But that way, because an outsider brings three things the parents don't bring. They bring objectivity. The parents think they bring objectivity, but the kids are thinking, no, you don't. You bring an agenda. They bring experience, like with us, over 300 families, we've helped start family meetings. And they bring knowledge. This is their focus. This is their job. This is what they do. The parent does other things. We can come in and we can bring those three things, and the parent usually can't. But that provides us the opportunity then to steer them to people like you to help them put together the plan so it actually has a likelihood of still being in place. I always tell people when they're thinking of a trust company, you want to find a trust company, you have a high likelihood that 75 years from now, they are still trying to do the good things for your family that they said that they wanted to do today. You go to any publicly traded trust company and you've seen it, Mellon. I mean, leadership changed, priorities changed. Bean Gamer came in after you and I were there and changed the priority to low service, high profit, as opposed to a balance between the two. And so you don't get that in a private trust company, though.
Absolutely, and that's for those of you in the audience, that's a big mantra of Bridgeford and why we're so not just independent but fiercely independent, just for the reasons you said, Tom. And Tom, again, you've reinvigorated my passion for this and in this conversation, and congratulations on what you've built. I mean, not only have you built a really successful business, but you're doing great work for families, and as I say, virtuous, essential. I think you're among the good guys in our industry, meaning that when the Atlantic attacks what we do or any other publication, I point to you. And I have mentioned your name several times over the last couple of years, saying, well, no, we're not nefarious. And by the way, if you don't know who Tom Rogerson is, you should, because he's actually doing amazing work for families. So no, we're not only are we not bad, we're actually important and virtuous. And again, obviously it's a passion point for me. So congratulations on what you've built and your brand. For our audience, Tom's information will be available. If any of this is sparking your interest, please reach out to Tom. He's an amazing resource. Obviously, I think everybody listening and viewing this can see why I became passionate about it. And Tom, I just want to thank you for the impact you've had. I mean, initially when we were going to launch Bridgeford, it was actually to offer this kind of service. That was one of the service lines we were going to do, to be very honest. And I have another business partner. We became very passionate about it. A CPA, and then ultimately we just decided we didn't have the expertise that you have. We didn't have it. Isn't, you just can't step into this one day, because and I will tell you, as much as respect I do have for Beck and Mellon and the other big institutionalized players, is sometimes this is a punchline, right? I mean, they tell $100 million family, oh, we're going to do all this for you. Okay, do you know how to do it? First of all. Second of all, they don't charge for it, so it's kind of it makes it even worse, right? Because it diminishes the importance of the great work you were doing, and they use it again as a sales tool rather than an actual tool to help the family. And I don't mean to be hypercritical, but I mean, I've seen it, and I've sat in meetings and I chuckle and I think, okay, all the things you're saying, you must have read an outline somewhere, because you don't know how to do this. And I know somebody who does, and his name is Tom Rogerson. So again, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you've done and how you've impacted my career. And again, our audience, please look up Tom. And Tom, I'll let you say some parting words.
Well, great, David. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to talk to anybody. And my wife and I take calls all the time just to explain what we do and how we do it. As I say, that I think our biggest impediment is not so much parents not wanting to do this work. I think it's that they think they can do it themselves. And ultimately, we want the family to be doing it themselves. But that's where we want to become the advocate for the children to learn how to do it, and then it really has long legs, and then it matches the plan, and it has a future. It has a legacy. Legacy planning is very different than estate planning,
For
and
sure.
we're trying to get more people on board.
For sure. And my hope is to become a client, so I have some work to do. Again, thank you so much for your time, Tom, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks a lot, David. Godspeed. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for listening to Bridgeford Trust Company's Delivering Direction and Control podcast series. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast to keep posted on when new episodes are added. And for more information, you can visit us online at bridgefordtrust.com.